I know this is the last talk, so yeah, I know that it's the Saturday night. Yes, Saturday weekend. Yes, I do understand, but please bear with us. It would be not a long talk. And just to give a brief intro, thanks for a good intro for us. And it's really good to have these Flutter meetups, and means we will try to also have some Flutter conferences in Bangalore soon. So I'm Gaurav Bhatnagar and he's Satish. We work in Maersk. I'm the lead architect there, and we have been using Flutter now since 2.5 years, and we have now migrated all our mobile apps which we have in Maersk, which are enterprise apps, as well as the customer facing app in Flutter. So without further ado, let me start with why state management, right? Um, Means whoever has even just done some minor work in Flutter, they know that okay, it's fine to use some stateful widgets or just some set state, right? It's completely fine to do that, and for a small scale application, it's the state management works fine. But when you have some more complex use cases, right, like where you have to change the settings inside and change the language of your app, their state management becomes really more important and critical, right? And that is where your app's architecture becomes really somewhere where you can at least make sure that it's easier for the new people who are joining in. So it's been what, 3 years now since Flutter has become stable, right? And apps are becoming more and more complex. So I will not go in more details around the different approaches we have. We do have different approaches, and everybody can use whichever it's something which is viable for them, right? But the main thing where we are trying to focus our talk today is around Riverpod, for which the basics are provider that came when Flutter was made stable, right? And provider is, as means just the talk before us, right? They were explaining about the widgets. The entire way the UI works of Flutter is through widgets. So provider is a wrapper over the inherited widget, right? And it makes it more easy to use, and it becomes like, means you can at least handle state in a more, like, means in a more streamlined manner, and it would be easier for you to at least make sure that you can have a small scale application. So means you can set, you can change, or you can transfer the state through the provider. But then, like, just to give you an example, right, when the things start becoming more complex, so then you can see the inadequacies of the provider itself. So this is just a simple example, since we work with Maersk, right? So vessel is something which is the Maersk ship. So when a vessel is actually leaving the, means actually it's just going to come to the terminal, there are tugboats which come, right? So they call the terminal that okay, send some tugboats. So I'm just giving an example of this, like there is a class vessel and then there is a class tugboats. So means vessel will require the tugboats, right? But now, so let's say that the vessel class can't exist, they will need to know the number of tugboats. But if you want to combine that using the provider mechanism, you can see the boilerplate code, right? Like it becomes quite tedious. It becomes, because that's the place where provider refuses to accept the value which actually is referencing another provider, right? You will need to use the proxy provider, and it becomes cumbersome. So then there are other items, like this is something which is very fairly quite, means what you say, right? You can come across where, for example, as I said, that provider just works with the inherited widget, and it is quite resembling the widget tree. So for example, if there is this widget 2 on the right and it needs the reference of provider 2, it's impossible to get it. Means like it's not like straightforward. So this is a small thing. You have workarounds, but when your app is becoming complex, you have like almost 12 to 13 modules like we have in our Maersk app. It becomes a mess, and your architecture is not clean. Then it becomes difficult to understand, and the code is not maintainable. The other thing is it's difficult because another same item, right, like the widget 4. So in this example is that you have the hierarchy, you have two different providers, but the provider 2 is the same kind of provider with a different value. But widget 4 now needs the counter int provider, but it can't get it. It can't directly parse and get that access. So that's another inadequacy of the provider. So these raise the problem. right? And that's where I think there was a need of a new solution or an abstraction through which we can make our life easier. Over to you, Satish.
Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you for explaining the problem that state management basically brings to the development life cycle. And every developer understands the pain of, managing a state throughout the application and just to make it persistent state, right? So there are a lot of solution as part of the state management. We will be focusing on the Riverpod. So Riverpod is a Dart solution. It's nothing has to do with the platform that we are currently using as a Flutter. It can work with other uh, platform as well. This is a container, right? This is a container which holds all the state that your application interacts with or persists with, and then it also allow to change those states. There are a couple of functions that are available within the Riverpod where you get to interact with them, create providers, and then you can change the state throughout the application. How you can do that basically is you need to have a global scope. So Riverpod basically gives you a global scope. So global scope meaning that your very first widget that comes in your application, right? So for here, if you see the example, main method is the building block where the Flutter execution starts. So my app is my first widget tree in my application, and I'm just using the provider scope to give the access to all the capability of Riverpod. And once you're done with this, you don't need to access or provide anywhere within your other modules, because your modules are going to keep pile on as the development progress, right? So there are a couple of functions as I mentioned, right? So we will see these function in action. So this is a piece of application that I have prepared. So this is a small application, right? So if you see what this application does, basically it changes the theme of the this app, right? And it's very easy to do that by just tapping. You don't see any glitches that happen. But how does it actually, render on the mobile devices, right? So it's just like I'm changing it, and if I go to the next screen, also that theme persists. It doesn't need to reload over here. The state has been already mutated somewhere, which is globally available for other module to consume it. How we actually do it, right? So let me go to my container. So this is my a container where the actually material is defined, and this is where we actually set the theme, right? So I need to listen to the provider where I'm just toggling this on and off about the dark mode and the light mode. So let me go to the first provider where I have created. So this is a provider, right? Where I have named them as a theme provider, and I'm using something called change notifier provider. And if you see, there is a method available over here is auto dispose. So auto dispose is basically what it does is when this provider is done doing its job, it will dispose it. Dispose it will put it in the garbage. You don't need to manually call something to dispose this particular to free the space. And this particular Riverpod, what it does is it returns basically this class, and what this class holds is it have a state, and this variable is the one where we will be changing or basically toggling the state, and we have a method to do that. So this method will be the one which will be called from the front end. So if I show you the front end, this is how you basically watch. So that was the provider, right? So when somebody provides, there is something called consumer, right? So somebody has to consume it. That's how the name has come as a consumer. And within the consumer, you have a different properties that you can access through. Mostly we will be using the widget references. So this is the widget reference, and what we can do on the widget reference is we can watch, and this watch is the name itself, right? It just keep watching to the state that this particular provider is giving to you, right? And this is the variable which we will be receiving from the provider. And what I do over here is simple thing. I just listen to the state of that variable which is local to this consumer, and then I toggle the dark and night mode, and this is how it basically works. So there are other benefit of having Riverpod, right? If you guys have used the provider, there is always that provider is not defined, something like that, right? It always pops in because every time you need to have a builder, you need to first provide that into the parent provider, and that becomes like, mess to have everywhere the providers, right? But in this case, you just have a global scope, so that gets terminated over here. And as I said, right, this is agnostic to the Flutter framework, so it's not dependent on Flutter framework. So it's basically can be used as a provider without having the context to it. So that's a couple of benefit that Riverpod brings. So if I want to put it in a single sentence, right, as Gaurav said, right, provider is basically the inherited widget. So inherited widget goes from top to bottom, where a parent passes data to the child, and that goes to another child, right? So if a provider is simplification of an inherited widget, right? So if provider solves the issue that inherited widget brings, then Riverpod is re-implementation of those inherited widget from the scratch. What do I mean by that is like when we are solving some problem using some provider, right? So we are not asking provider to solve for us. We are directly going using the Riverpod and solving that inherited widget itself by changing the architect of it. So that will be all from this session. Gaurav will continue.
Thanks, Satish. And so yeah, that's where Satish mentioned about chain notifiers. So let me talk about the future and stream providers, right? These are the different flavors now within the Riverpod ecosystem. So obviously we will have APIs which we want to integrate. We want to integrate some JSON files and then show it and render it on the screen. So it is something where it might take more time, right? So those asynchronous tasks where we will return a future. We in the Flutter world, we have future builder and stream builders. So in Riverpod, they have provided us something better, that is future and stream provider. Now the main difference here is that the builders give us a snapshot, and then it becomes too much tedious to go through all the conditions and then render it on the screen. Whereas here I get an async value. That's much more easy to manipulate the data, the asynchronous data, and show it on the screen, right? So let me go here, right, where Satish was explaining about how this dark theme works. So here, if you see that we have a future provider, and this is basically getting the data from the assets and then rendering that entire container list, right? So in easy, like this right now it is from the JSON asset, but it can be easily from an API itself, right? So here you can see that we have also used auto dispose, so it will clean up after rendering it, right? And then if I go back to the item list provider, here if you can specifically see, we get the async value. Now this is the most beneficial item, because here I get this async value, and when I use that when method, I get the different states which are loading, body or error, and accordingly I can easily just render it as per the state which I have, right? If I have loading, I will show a progress indicator. I have the entire response, then I will render it on the screen. Otherwise, if I have an error, then I will just show that error. So it becomes easy to use future provider, and then it removes the redundancy which we have through the future builder. And same thing applies on the stream provider itself. Means there you can again use that ref.watch so that you can continue to watch the stream, and then you can get the latest value which is emitted through the stream. Coming back, which we will go to the full circle, as I just mentioned, that combining the provider using the proxy provider was so much of a hassle. The same vessel metaphor I will use. So here you can see that using the chain notifier provider, now I just need to combine it, and the code has become so much simpler, clean. I can just use the tugboats and reference.watch, and then easily in the vessel provider I can get the details of the number of tugboats. So that's how it becomes easy in the Riverpod ecosystem. And then there is this modifier that is called as family, right? Like for example, if I now need some more information, I have the details of the tugboat, but if I need some more understanding or more details around that, like okay, what's the color, and if the tugboat is going to be viable enough or not. So means those additional details can also be added using the family modifier. So if you want to add that external information to construct your provider, then you can use the family modifier, and it has a lot of different use cases. Like for example, if you are going to navigate from the list to the details, right? And then you can use the family modifier using that, right? So it makes it more easy to navigate, and the app architecture becomes more cleaner using the Riverpod state management. Back to you, Satish. Thank you.
Yeah. So in previous session, right, we just saw that there is something called change notifier, and it just notify the UI when there is a state change happening on the provider side. Here, we will be using directly state provider. So what is the difference, right? So in state provider, we are not going to notify the UI. We are directly going to change the state itself. And when that state has been referenced in UI, that state going to be automatically updated. So you don't need to worry about if I change it from here, how I'm going to notify the UI side, right? So this is how basically state notifier works. So let me just give you. So this is home page, right? So we have a list here. Okay. So as you can see, this application, right, it has multiple couple of items on the screen, and when I tap on them, right, it updates. If you see on the top right corner, we are updating the cart value, right? So it just keeps go and just add that number of items that I'm clicking on the UI side, right? So how it is updating? So basically, what we are doing over here is, so this is a provider where it has the initial state as empty. That's why the cart was, there was nothing in the cart. So this is, as soon as you load the application, you'll see nothing on the cart until there is some event that is happening on the UI side. And then there is a method which takes in parameter. So we have predefined models where we actually pass some data, and just to simplify it, we have created a model to render the items on the UI side without being worried about what should come with this list item, right? So this is a method which takes a parameter and it basically updates the state. So if you see over here, we are using spread operator. So this state will be empty in the very first beginning, but we are going to add this item list, and that's how it is being updated over here. That's how it basically see on the UI side. It's similar to what we saw in the last one. We are still going to watch that. So that list will be watched. So whatever was happening in the provider, that will be watched here. But how we are actually updating it? So there were a couple of functions, right? There was one of them was read. So if you see in the bottom over here, again we are using the widget reference and we are using the read. So read and watch difference is, watch name itself, it's continually going to watch for any changes. Read is like you just call it and forget it, right? So it's basically for the methods that are there on the lifecycle hookup, the Flutter, or the on change or on the tap, right? So this is basically on press method that we have on these cards, and then it just send this data to the list, and that's how list is being updated. But if I click on this card, right, I have the data over here, and sorry about the render flex, right? So this is how the data in a list being sent, and this is not part of the home page, right? This is part of the card. Sorry, this card, right? And I'm listening the same provider over here. So this provider is listening on different page, but as the whole purpose of the Riverpod is global, right? So from anywhere you can listen on it, you can change on it, and then the UI will be automatically rendered based on whatever change notifier or state notifier you are using. So that's how basically the powerful Riverpod it is. Let me just go to the next. Okay, so the enough of development, right? So when we have a big application, when we keep on adding the module, we need to make sure that the code is testable, and Riverpod gives you out of the box testability itself, right? So you don't need to rely on some other component to enable that testability within the application. So this is a small application test that I have written, like widget testing. I'm just trying to find some widget type which is of the consumer. So somebody if goes change it, it will notify and it will fail in the pipeline if we have the pipeline enabled for these checks, right? So this is how testability is there. So now come the hard part, right? We talk a lot about being powerful, this, that, and all, but it's also become quite hectic that I cannot allow everybody to just go and change the state from whenever they want. So it's very important that when somebody is deciding to use Riverpod, to go through the provider to understand how actually the provider works, and how you can basically change state and rely on the state, right? As Marvel, right? In Marvel, they say that if somebody gives you power, you need to be responsible, right? So great power comes with great responsibility. Riverpod gives you power, but you need to be more careful how you can use it and how you can actually define the state throughout the application. So Gaurav, you want to add something in conclusion?
Yeah. So yes, that's thanks Satish, right? And I would just like to quote Kamal, like means there are like different ice cream flavors, right? Like means what I really like her analogy. So basically, you can use any state management approach which you want. Like these are you can taste it, you can try it, and then if it suits you, then you can continue with it. So means that's where like for us Riverpod is working, and we really are means that separation of concern is helping us out. But for you, if the block works, please go ahead. We will not ask you that. We just wanted to share that how Riverpod helped us to make the complex application more cleaner. Thank you.
Do you guys have any questions? And we just ran out of time, I guess.
Yeah, I know.
But you guys can post us. I think most of you guys know Gaurav, but yeah, you can post us a question and we will try to answer them.
Yeah. Please post any of us. Yeah, and you can reach us through LinkedIn, Twitter. I will pass on our contacts. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.